Hey, everybody. Welcome to In Case You Wanted to Know. My name's John. I am with my good friend Jim Henderson today. Our buddy Derek is off on vacation, hanging out with the family right now. So it's just you and me, Jim. How are you?
Doing great, John. It's always a great day.
It's always a great day. Well, let's talk. We've touched on this in past podcasts, carbon credits, how they are. We haven't gone too deep, but we talked a little bit about them. They have been a part of the sustainability movement going back to the late 80s. There's been ups, there's been downs, but man, have people taken advantage, corporations moreover, taken advantage of the carbon credit systems. So I figured we'd get into it a little bit and talk about some of the scandals that have taken place.
Yeah, I think you had a kind of a field day, kind of digging that one up because we talked about it, and I think like almost anything having to do with renewable energy, the general public is very unaware of what's going on and behind the scenes. And there's been a lot of regulations put in play that require businesses to be more green. And so, this initiative started many years ago before we started doing solar on our warehouse, and that's more than 10 years ago. But the concept was to get an initiative to encourage businesses to mostly businesses to, if they couldn't themselves get carbon neutral, they could buy credits from companies that were able to do that. So you see, the advent of all of the wind farms and the solar farms going, and it kind of exploded into areas like farming and, ground cover, because, green eats up carbon dioxide. So even farmers have been able to get into selling carbon credits to industries.
For those that don't know and might want to know, carbon credits are defined as financial instruments that represent the reduction or removal of greenhouse gas emissions, primarily CO2. And they are generated by, if you're starting up a power plant, you're going to be putting out an awful lot of greenhouse gases, primarily CO2. So what you do is you work with someone who will promise to conserve a forest somewhere, and you sort of buy credits that allow you to be dirty and filthy because somebody over here is doing really good things for the world, which in theory sounds like a pretty good idea. But in practice, it's turned out to be very, very difficult.
A very slippery slope, as we would say, because the average tree, I think I read, an average size tree per year will consume, I don't know, let's say several hundred pounds of CO2. So if you have a forest that's, and again, some of it's somewhat arbitrary. I mean, It's really hard to measure. Is that a full-grown tree? Is that where the math is there, but the metrics for making it exact are very hard. We do know that a certain amount of CO2 is emitted on average, let's say for electricity production. So on average, using natural gas, diesel, or gas, which all emit, coal, emit a certain amount of CO2. On average, for every kilowatt hour produced, the CO2 is like 0.8 pounds per kilowatt hour. So using that, the same thing with burning gas in your car. There's a formula, and you can say 1 gallon of gas emits, I think it's around 18. Some people round it up, but I think it's roughly 18 pounds of CO2 per gallon. So our cars emit quite a bit of CO2. But getting back to the power plants, I mean, they were the big ones. But any type of manufacturing plant where they're emitting, and again, you got to get it measured. You have to have certain things. And again, when you start doing mandates for businesses to hit certain targets and they don't want to clean up their act, or it's hard for them to do it, or it's financially hard, we can just say opportunities sprung up overnight
Yeah.
for some business people and entrepreneurs. And I, until you kind of brought it up a few days ago, John, had no idea the kind of money that we're talking about, because these whistleblowers now are big in the carbon credit market. And I was kind of doing my own
It's
thing.
wild.
Yeah, we've got our heads down. We're putting solar on buildings and trying to change the world. One building at a time.
One roof at a time.
Yeah, and so you're not really paying attention to what I'm looking in front of me. These scandals and these whistleblowers are getting big dividends, and they get lawyers, and there's a whole process for bringing these people to account for fraud, just saying we're producing this amount of CO2 when they're not, and then selling it, and these people that are buying it are basically what they call, some of them are just greenwashing. They're saying that
Yeah.
they're carbon neutral. It's cheaper for them to just, and it's great marketing when you stop and think of it. You just tell the public that you're carbon neutral, when in fact, are you really?
Right.
I can think of a bank that I
Hmm.
won't mention names, but you walk in and it says we're carbon neutral, and I'm thinking, I don't see any solar. I don't see anything on the building there in the middle of a downtown city. I don't see anything that indicates that they're carbon neutral. So you have to think in your mind, they're buying those credits, they're
Hmm.
buying that marketing, and how much of it's real. And when it's big business, big banks, multinational banks, let's think about these hedge fund people and these groups that like Chase, Morgan Chase, and stuff, that want to look good in front of their potential investors. We're green, and are they really? And how
Right.
much? How much can you fight it? And what's it take? Because the process is to actually blow the whistle and then prosecute and get somebody for that type of fraud. It looks very time consuming
Yeah, it
and
is.
very
And and
litigious.
and we're not talking about, with these big corporations, we're not talking about chump change. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars generated from the sale of these carbon credits, which may or may not be legit. For some context, in 1989, a company called Applied Energy was building coal plants around the United States, and they were building one in Connecticut. And they knew, the CEO of the company knew how much, the level of CO2 emissions that they were going to put out. And they figured, okay, to offset the amount of CO2 we're going to be emitting from our power plant, we need to plant about 50 million trees to level the playing field. Okay, great. Well, in this was in Connecticut, and there was not a swath of land big enough to accommodate 50 million trees. So they said, all right, let's look at Guatemala. And they went to Guatemala and talked to people there and said, let's plant these trees. People in Guatemala said, great, no problem. So what wound up happening was there were problems with the type of trees that got planted. There were conflicts over the land that was devoted to planting all these trees. There were local people who sabotaged the planting of the trees because they wanted to plant the trees on farmland that these folks had previously made their living from, sustained their
Sure.
communities from. In the end, researchers calculated that the program had only offset about 10% of the emissions that one coal plant in Connecticut were producing. So that was sort of the start of it. And then the carbon credit thing built up from there. The issue, though, is exactly what you said. It's really difficult to measure. You can measure the amount of CO2 that your power plant or your manufacturing is emitting. You can measure that.
Sure.
It's much more difficult to measure how much of that CO2 is actually being offset by the planting of trees or
Right.
conserving a forest versus, cutting it down and things like that. There are organizations. One is called Verra, VERRA,
Yep.
that was set up to sort of be the governing agency that would track this stuff. The problem is that they don't have a really great record of doing so. And meanwhile, they're still allowing companies to buy and sell carbon credits to offset what they're doing and make themselves look and feel good. But is it really doing anything?
Right. Well, and the enormity of it is I think astounding. The fines are gigantic. What are they fining these companies? It's got to be tens of billions. It's got to be a phenomenal amount of money. So if these people are getting caught and paying these fines, what are they? What's the market like? It's got to be tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars that is being traded
Mm-hmm.
for in and again, we know from practical application, dollar for dollar, kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour, what we're doing with solar. And so it's very measurable, very accurate, actually, what you're doing, what you're offsetting. But as you start getting into these quote green areas where a tree represents this, you look at certain types of farmland, green leafy cover plants like rhubarb has more CO2 offset credit than certain trees.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're looking at some really gray areas. I mean, okay, so you've got these trees and they lose all their leaves in the fall and the winter, so they're not doing anything. Are those things being taken into account? Or, windstorms that knock down all of the trees? Or there's just, is it a new tree? Is it a mature tree?
Of course. Yeah.
And so we can always use averages, but the averages are only not that accurate. They really can't be. So given the magnitude of it, I could see where there's a lot of people that want to get in on this. Ultimately, are we really changing? I think that's the question we're talking about. These are the things that we want people to know about. Are we really changing our environment with these? I call them games. They're
Mm-hmm.
played talking high dollar games that are being played because if you're in the $1 billion market for just rewarding people for turning these people in, there's a lot of bad stuff going on out there. And so there are businesses that just want to look like they care, like they're doing something. Okay, we're gonna set aside $100 million to for carbon offset and then we can
Mm-hmm.
just say like this bank I was telling you about. Are they really carbon neutral? Can they really say that? And if so, what kind of paperwork do you fill out when you've got 2,500 branches around 4 different countries and every one of them saying that they're carbon
Right.
neutral? They're going to be buying a lot of credits, and where are they buying them from, and how difficult is it to really track the accuracy of it?
Yeah, and the credits that this bank is buying, we'll say, they're buying credits so that other people can do good green work somewhere else. Again, in theory, it's a great idea. The problem is ensuring that the work is actually being done somewhere else. And
Sure.
that's part of the problem.
Well,
In
here's a simple question, John, and maybe it's just too simple, but so you've got a processing plant in Connecticut where you're processing chemicals or whatever,
Mhm.
and there's a certain amount of CO2, and you buy your carbon credits in Guatemala. Well, there's no harmful CO2 being produced down there. I'm looking in my mind. I'm thinking of these big smokestacks in New England giving off all this CO2 and that we're worried about. How is a forest, 15,000 miles away doing us any good in New England? I mean,
Right.
the concept is I can't see it. I mean,
Yeah,
I
right.
really don't see how being that far away. I mean, and I read about a scam in China on these covered tens of billions of dollars.
Mhm.
What? How are they? And this is to comply with some of the European rules that are coming up. And but it was, I mean, they get called out on it, and it was billions of dollars. So what you do in one part of the world, how does that affecting the other part of it?
I wondered that same thing. And I suppose if you're looking at it on a global level, sure, it's anything is better than nothing. But if, like you said, if the plant is here in the U.S. and we're dumping tons and tons and tons of CO2 here, it's great for, Cambodia or Guatemala,
Sure,
but do those benefits really make their way to the US? Again, thinking globally, sure, it's great, but thinking a little more locally, I'm not so sure. So
sure.
I don't know. Like I said, I was reading yesterday, Cambodia was another country that got involved in the carbon credits and all that. Great concept. Here's what happened in Cambodia. The Cambodian government has designated 41% of their total surface land as nature reserves and national parks. But in the process of doing that and designating those grounds as, I don't know specifically if it's carbon credit based land, but it's to keep Cambodia green. In the process of doing that, they took over land masses from 8 indigenous Chong villages and moved them all out, moved all the indigenous people out. And they did this without speaking to them about it prior. There was no consultation with, tribal elders, that sort of thing. In fact, those projects had been underway for 31 months before they ever brought anybody to the table to discuss it. Meanwhile, a lot of those indigenous folks got rounded up, jailed, held without any sort of trials or talks. And, people were going in, the Ministry of the Environment folks were arbitrarily searching homes and confiscating items that had anything to do with sustainable forestry. And it was really, really horrible. So conceptually, all these things are great, but the execution can be pretty questionable. And is it actually doing any good is the next question. I think it's fantastic that big corporations like Shell have invested billions and billions of dollars in carbon capture technology so that they can produce their products and theoretically capture the carbon that they're creating. But how well does it work? I was one of the things I read. Shell Canada specifically, has faced accusations of phantom carbon credits,
Right.
that they were utilizing to meet their climate targets, particularly in Canada and China. The claims stemmed from the company's involvement in projects where emissions reductions were either overcounted, misrepresented, or never actually occurred at all.
Right. Yeah.
Greenpeace Canada investigated Shell's flagship carbon capture project, finding that it made over $200 million selling credits for reductions that never happened.
Never happened. Sure.
Yeah. And as of last year, I think it was, there are only about 40 facilities that are currently in operation that utilize carbon capture, which seems to me to be a really low number. But the reason, apparently, is because of the cost to build those carbon capture facilities. And the fact is, a builder, like any other business person, they're not going to do it unless it's a profit generator for them. So it's hard to argue that logic too.
It's like anything else. So you've got a carbon capture facility. What runs it? Energy.
Right. which
Just
which generates carbon in the process.
and they could say, well, it's consuming or eating 4 times what it's producing. I'm not sure again that you can, that's sort of like getting something out of nothing. You know what I mean? I mean,
Mhm.
until there's a known entity where you can actually produce more energy than what's needed to produce it. I mean, the closest thing we have is nuclear energy because it's such a compact and pound for pound we get more energy out of it, but
Mhm.
it's still the repercussions of what it represents. It can be bad. I mean, Chernobyl,
Yeah,
3 Mile
3 Mile Island.
Island,
Yep.
Japan, and whatnot. And there's arguments that even with all three of those combined, they don't even remotely come close to what we put out in the atmosphere every day worldwide through burning carbon. And I believe that probably is fairly true, but it works well unless you live 5 miles from Chernobyl or live within 3 miles of 3 Mile Island,
Yeah.
where, you end up, with all kinds of cancers, and then it's not so good.
Right.
But
Suddenly nuclear is not quite an attractive option.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it goes back to the money thing is running this, and if there's money to be made, there's going to be a handful of businesses and governments that are going to take advantage of that, and I think practically we've proven and are proven that there's ways to produce energy with very little carbon footprint. And you know, there's the argument, well, batteries and the solar cells themselves, but by and large, because those systems are now running 25 to 35 years, and a lot of the product can be, there are ways to recycle used solar panels, and I'm sure there's going to be ways to recycle lithium ion batteries, and there's a will, there's a way. But I mean, there's always arguments against everything in terms of
Mhm.
what the carbon offset is. But I think these ones that we're talking about are egregious approaches to something that I think the normal person would never
Yeah.
think that there's billions and billions of dollars, if not trillions, being traded. And a lot of it just doesn't even exist. And
Here's another great one that I came across yesterday. In 2012, the New York Times reported that when factories in China and India worked out that they could earn more than 11,000 carbon credits per ton by destroying a waste gas normally released in the manufacturing of a certain refrigerant, they ramped up the production of the refrigerant just so they could be paid to destroy the waste product, which was certainly not the intent. I mean, it worked great for them because, as you said,
sure,
at the end of the day, for most people and most companies, it's all about money.
sure.
Oh, they were like, well, we don't need this much refrigerant, but we are killing it by destroying the waste gas from the refrigerant we're making. So let's make a whole hell of a lot more. I get it,
Sure.
but I don't get
It
it.
no, well, and again, it looks good on paper and it keeps a lot of money in people's pockets, but in reality, it's harming us.
Hmm.
These things are harming us. I mean, we could talk about it a lot, and we have, but I think being responsible starts individually,
Hmm.
and if we don't approach it individually, then how do we expect corporate and governments to be any different?
Hmm. Yeah. What does it think globally, act locally?
Right.
Was the phrase. Yeah, because I don't know what the answer is. And that's one of the things that sucks about this conversation. Like I would love to say, look at all these scandals and look at how sketchy and shifty this carbon credit trading market really is. Here's what we need to do to fix it. I don't have that answer.
Right. Yeah. Well, because some of it is legit, but
Sure,
I
sure.
think a lot of it really is not. Is there an answer to it? It's always nice if we can finish our conversation with, well, this is what you can do.
Yeah.
And I think more than anything, the best thing we can do is just educate one another and make it known. And then knowledge is the beginning of the path of change.
Hmm.
So hopefully we've educated a few people. If they look at this podcast, they'll be thinking, oh, there's more going on behind the scenes. And
Yeah.
am I going to jump up and down when I hear a particular large corporation is carbon neutral? Because there's a good chance they're not.
Right. Greenwashing.
Yeah, they're and maybe even like I said, I'm not pointing fingers, but maybe the company board of directors and CEOs and people running the show think that what they're doing is legit. And what do they know if they don't know, right?
Right. You said it yourself. The first step is education.
Sure.
Whether you're getting that knowledge from somebody else or, a couple of idiots doing a podcast or doing the research yourself. But, look at not to pick on petroleum companies, but they're pretty big producers of greenhouse gas emissions and energy plants. Try and find out who is the least big offender and try and fuel up your gas tank at their gas stations versus the other guys. I mean,
Or don't fuel up at all.
or yeah, buy an EV and and and
Well,
and then buy an EV from a company who tries to source their lithium in the most sustainable fashion, you know?
Right.
Because
There's,
everything goes back farther and farther and farther than any of us realize.
yeah, it's what we see on the surface and what's really beneath it are two different things. Because I say this all the time in things that I look at. Energy is what has civilized the world, right? Back to caveman figuring out that fire comes from a piece of wood, and we went from that to coal, and then from coal to oil to nuclear, and now we've gone almost full circle and realized we can get this stuff from wind, sun, and geothermal. And those are much more sustainable. But the bottom line is every single product, the phone that we're using for the podcast, our computer, the speaker, the headset, almost everything required some type of energy to produce.
Mm-hmm.
And how did we produce it? Well, through some type of natural resource. It's either a tree or all plastics are derived from some type of petroleum. What we use in our cars and our trucks and heating oil is a fraction of what we use to actually make products. So much of what we have in our worldwide is plastic, and that's all petroleum based.
Mm-hmm.
And requires energy to produce it, energy to mine it, energy to refine it, energy to process it, and energy to get it from where it was made to the retailer, from the retailer to the business or to the homeowner. And energy is the number one thing that defines us as a civilization,
Mm-hmm.
modern civilization, not living in the Stone Ages. And with it, we have all the creature comforts that we have. Without it, well, we're living in caves. And
We're
so,
back in the dark. Well, always a good talk. These are fun, and my God, we could talk for 2 weeks just about the carbon credit scandals.
yeah, and I think it's worth, again, if you don't know what you don't know, then it's hard to really speak out one way or the other. But the more we do know, the easier it is to hold people accountable, businesses accountable, our government accountable for these things, because big business and government, we all know that they work hand in hand worldwide. It's just
Yep.
the way things are, and as individuals, we can't do much about it unless we get united in our approach to demanding different.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely. Well,
well,
with
thanks,
that,
John.
yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks for the chat, and I look forward to the next one.
All right, have a good one,
All right,
John.
man.
Thanks.
See ya.